Welcome to the Weekly Wrap in the studio. Looking back at the week that's almost concluded is Arno, Smit, who is from Sky Blue Fund Managers, and he's joined at the desk by Joanne, Baynham from Myton Optimal. What a week, you two. What a week it's been. I mean, politics-wise, let me start with you, Joanne, and start with the charges being dropped and Mr. Zuma running off to Zimbabwe in the wake of all these revelations from the public protectors. Revelations, 500-odd pages of them. It's incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. I think what it does say, it's a very positive day or positive week for South African politics from a perspective of, yes, the terrible things have happened, but we at least know about it. Unlike Turkey, for instance, and other emerging markets where every time you say one bad thing about the government, you're put into prison or they try to kill you. So I think, South Africa is pretty exceptional in that regard. I don't think any of us like the fact that Zuma's with Mugabe at the moment, because Mugabe's not known for being quite cool about people having a say in the running of their country. But yes, I think, though, if you look at what happened this week, I think the person that's come out with the most egg on their face, and I've seen lots of pictures to show that, it has to be Brian Molefe. I think Zuma actually has been quite quiet relative to the scandal behind Eskom.
Well, he normally nips out the country, doesn't he, when something like this happens? But, if you look at Business Day, the front page this morning, it says Eskom keeps up its attack on the public protector's state capture report. It says Thuli Madonsela did not have enough time to sift through all the information about it, but it could have helped her. And Brian Molefe with the crying, did you see what she said about him crying? What a great act it was. She was just making some barbed comments about the fact that, it was all very dramatic and it was all staged, it was all calculated. And I think so. I can't really say too much, obviously, but I know a couple of things about Mr. Molefe, just through dealings with him and interviewing him. And, there's no smoke without fire. Arno? Are you allowed to say anything here? You're very quiet.
Mr. Molefe is saying he went to the Shebeen, and this morning he said no, he was talking about somebody else. So clearly there's a bit of a miscommunication. If you look at the report, I do think there's a lack of factual information within the report. So it definitely needs an inquiry, a commission of inquiry, which he has put forward as a proposal. So it definitely somebody needs to look and find out what the facts
Arno,
are.
can I ask you about that? I haven't read the report, to be fair, but I've seen snippets of it. And as an ex-accountant, I struggle with the fact that Brian Molefe or Eskom or whoever was in charge at the time, it might not be him, but it might be somebody else. How do you buy coal from a company that doesn't have any coal? And you're Eskom.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Because this is something we need for our grid to get the lights shining.
So they are saying that they had to do it in a rush because they needed coal quite quickly, obviously.
Yes.
That's why they didn't have time to go through all
But they didn't have any coal from the
I
company they
agree
were
with
buying
you.
coal from in a rush.
I agree fully with you, but there's no factual information in the report as to how much was paid. Was there payments made to different bank accounts than the ones there should have been to?
Okay.
Stuff like that. But I think that information would probably come out of a commission of inquiry or whatever they call it. And that would happen. That's what she put forward. And as we know from the previous experience, what the public protector puts forward, that needs to happen. So if she says there's an inquiry, commission of inquiry, that will happen. Nobody's going to try and test that again. We've been there, and that clearly didn't work for the president. So, but what I do think is important is that if you spoke 3 weeks ago, and I think we briefly spoke about it in the studio 3 weeks ago, we said, I think, Joanne, your view was that this might take a lot longer to actually get rid of Mr. Zuma. And now all of a sudden, you get some of the factions within the ANC who's apparently saying he might be gone by December.
I've got to tell you, I don't know what, you and I are obviously reading different things, but I read something this week that said, yes, it's a damning report, it's damning for people, the likes of Molefe, etc., but Zuma, there's not a lot of evidence against Zuma in this whole thing. A lot of conjecture, but not a lot of evidence, in your own words, as you said in the report, but even less for Zuma. He stays until 2019. I don't see anything that's changed here. I think there's a groundswell of opposition in this country, but I think the NEC continues to protect him. So from the readings I've read is, yes, we're aware of this information. It's not a great day for South Africa. It's a great day for knowledge and judicial inquiry and all those good things about this country. I still don't see anything yet that says Zuma's putting his hand up and says, I'm going. And maybe December, I just don't buy it. I still think he stays.
I don't think Zuma's ever going to put his hand up and say, I'm going up. It's obviously got to be, there's a movement within the top ranks, apparently.
Okay.
And there's more and more people moving against Zuma than there was before. And one of the options is, and it seems to me like an amicable option for both parties, because the ANC obviously doesn't want to upset the apple cart. They don't really want to fire him, because that's going to create a media circus.
They'll
which
go
they
to
don't, which they really can't afford now. So probably what they can do is they can do a presidential pardon, like we had in the TRC when we had the Truth and Reconciliation, in the old days. There was a presidential pardon. So if you did something wrong with the president, say, okay, it's fine, you've admitted, so let's move on.
So there would be 788 pardons because that's how many charges are against him.
But it's
in
only
other
the only problem with that solution. If you want to get rid of your president or getting rid of your president, you need a solution. The only problem with that solution is you need a new president to actually pardon, So you need to get rid of Zuma before you can actually pardon him for the charges. And then the last avenue which it doesn't close, the DA can still open a case. So civil cases can still be opened, but Parliament or from government, they can't open because now President has now said, you're now fine, you leave.
Arno.
That's one of the options.
He'll
on
never
the
leave
table.
without a pardon because he knows he's going to jail. So there has to be a pardon somewhere. He's never going to leave.
So that's the most
going to
amicable.
exile like Idi Amin did. He went to Saudi Arabia, didn't he?
Well, maybe he'll go to Dubai because that's where the Guptas are sitting.
So that's the most
supposedly.
amicable solution at this stage for both parties. Both parties being the
Yes.
ANC and the president and his faction. If it happens, so let's just assume it might happen by 2017. They've got their national conference. Maybe something happens there. Same with Thabo Mbeki, something like that. Then what might happen is you might have a complete change of guard. So premiers might change. You might have new ministers because there's obviously people in top positions. Premiers, for example, who's in the Zuma camp. So that whole faction needs to get flushed out and a new faction comes in. So I think we're in for interesting times.
Yeah, we are. But I mean, are there the people that can succeed the upper echelons of the ANC, the ruling party, and the government? I mean, are there people behind the scenes are ready to step into these jobs, even if these people are allegedly corrupt?
I'm probably the
They're
wrong
quite
person to ask.
experienced.
Cyril Ramaphosa is pretty impressive.
But Cyril also had his mistakes in the past.
No, sure, but his ex-wife is not too shabby either. She's a medical doctor after all. She's quite intelligent, and being an ex-divorced person, she's probably not very in his camp in the first place. So the fact is, she's not terribly. And there's the third name at the moment. I can't remember his name. There's also being touted to replace Zuma. So there is some depth.
Will it
there.
be turmoil? Something's going to happen. Will it be tumultuous for the markets, or will it be as it is at the moment, certainly for the bond market and the rand, positive?
What if Zuma's replaced?
No, I mean just what's happening now. They're flushing out. I mean, there is a flushing out. It may not.
Yeah, at the moment,
it
I
may
think
take a long time, but something is happening.
Yeah, I think
you
as I say, the rule of
don't
law
want-
is being upheld. I think that's what ordinary South Africans are seeing, that you can't sweep this on the carpet. We will find out what's going on. The problem is, it still might take another 2 or 3 years because this commission is going to take some time. It won't happen. You're absolutely right. There's her evidence, but you have to prove it in a court of law. So it's going to take some time. But I think Zuma has seemed to lose his power base in the last couple of months. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think it's quite as bullish as the market's pricing in. I think the market's being a little bit ahead of itself. And don't forget, we still have this ratings downgrade hanging over our heads.
Just on the back of that, I mean, if we talk about the rand, that's probably you need to separate it from the share market or the listed property market or whatever you look at other markets. So if we just focus on the rand, there was an IMF working paper out last week, and they did a lot of research on what actually drives rand volatility. So is it local politics? Is it local monetary data that comes out, economic data that comes out, or is it offshore economic data? Which is the biggest driver? That's not to say it's positive or negative. That's just to say volatility. So moves up or down. And the biggest driver by a long mile is offshore monetary data, economic data coming out of the US or UK or Europe, followed then by political instability. So I don't think we should put too much emphasis on the political instability in terms of rand view going forward. It will have an effect, but for me, the most important thing, and this is what is going to happen with the Fed, what's going to happen in the UK. We've just seen inflation in the UK. We've seen proper growth coming out of the UK. So those moves from central banks might be far more superior than what happens due to political instability in South Africa, unless it's obviously a big move, unless the ANC fires Zuma tomorrow and replaces him with somebody else. But that's unexpected. That's not something that you can price in now, I think. What you might price in is you might say, the lead up to the actual conference in 2017, You can watch it and you can see what happens, but they're not just going to wake up one day and fire him. That's I think, too far-fetched.
No, I agree.
Okay, well, let's talk about the overseas markets. You talk about the influence on the rand. We've got, as we pre-record this show, we've got the US jobs data later this afternoon. Joanne, what is it, 170,000, the whisper number? Does it matter?
Yeah, I think it's the first time I've been in your studio where I don't actually think it matters. I think if it's an absolutely horrific number, then maybe the markets will get really nervous because that might mean Trump wins. Because, the Democrats have not helped.
Are you still a
economy.
Trumpster, by the way?
Let's just point out what I said I said on your show.
No, Arno will back me up on this. You said he's going to win.
No, I said the probability of him winning is quite high. Very different. Okay. And I think that's a very...
She said he's going to...
I think it's very...
And I said,
and my comment went on to say... Everyone expects him to lose, and that was probably 3 weeks ago. What are the odds now against the two of them? She was a 12% point lead at that point. She's now about 1.5%. So, from a rate of change perspective, I've been right in the last 3 weeks. Everything being said, I hope rational Americans won't vote him in. The problem is, I think she's so disliked in the US. As awful as he is, and it's a bit like South Africa in a sense. Trump, at least, what you see is what you get. He's brash, he's rude, he's sexist, he's all these things, but he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. She, on the other hand, pretends to be all wonderful and sweet and nice. Meanwhile, she's lying about everything she's doing. And she stands the status quo. So if you're an average American, as what I've said all along, I think there's a very good chance Trump could get a lot closer than you think. And even if she wins, you've got a very divided America. So let's take Brexit, for instance. Let's get back to Brexit. Now, very interesting. We've had a week in politics in South Africa.
We'll do Brexit
I need
after
to
the
bring
break.
up this, sorry, but just bring up a point about South Africa this week. The journalism here has been phenomenal in terms of the law, the courts, state, whatever it's been. We've had really good reporting. The UK courts this week decided that they don't like the idea of Brexit and Parliament needs to vote on it. Theresa May may not unilaterally decide on this decision. Did you see the newspapers in the UK this week putting three judges on the front covers of all the newspapers saying...
Did you see the judges, by the way?
Yeah, they're not pretty, but that's not the point.
That's three old middle-aged white men
okay, but you
with
see,
wigs on.
You're going with the whole feeling, is what they're saying is, how dare they tell us what we can do with our country? So you've still got a very divided UK, and you're still going to have a very divided US no matter who wins on Tuesday.
Okay, we'll get back to the UK after the break, but let's talk about the Trump thing, because I saw a comment this morning that said... Not voting for Trump because you don't like Hillary Clinton is like slitting your wrists in order to bring your blood pressure down. What is going to happen on Monday? I don't know. Will we know on Tuesday?
I don't think anybody knows.
No, with Wednesday, sorry.
Just to what Joanne has spoken about as well. I mean, we had a Fed meeting last week, or this week, not last week, this week. And I don't think anybody paid any attention to the Fed meeting. I didn't read any articles on the front page of any Fed meeting. Exactly the point. So for the next week, you can forget about any economic data, anything that comes out of the US. It's all going to be elections, and that's what's going to drive news flow from the US, and that's what's going to drive the market. And we've already seen that the market's down in the US because of uncertainty, because it's now a much closer race than it was 3 weeks ago. Just again, and I want to re-emphasize this, is look at what the Senate is, and look at the split between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and in the House. Don't only focus on the presidential race, because those two can make or break the whole system. If they fall into the same category, being the Democrat, then I think it's actually it might be a very good election for the US. If it's still a hung council, then it's debatable. Then obviously
hang on. So you say, if the House and the Senate are both Democrats, that's good for the US. So you're going on to say that if governments can actually make decisions, that's good. Now, for years, we've always been told that gridlock in America is the best thing for American politics because governments can't get involved and they have to let enterprise do their own thing. So I'm interested to find the rhetoric has changed lately. Oh, good, if they're all Democrats, that's great, things will get done. I've been told something in markets. It's fantastic when politicians can't do anything. When their hands are tied, how fabulous is that?
Well, just hold that thought on, Joanne. We're going to take a break now. After the break, the weekly wrap will continue. Welcome back to the Weekly Wrap. Joanne, Baynham, Myton, Optimal, Arno, Smit, Sky Blue Fund Managers, looking back at the week that's almost concluded with. We've been talking about the extraordinary political week in South Africa. We're having a look forward to the jobs data this afternoon for the United States of America, and also looking, of course, at the big event on Tuesday, which is the US presidential election. We should know some of the results on Wednesday morning. Just go back to that, Joanne. I interrupted you just before the break. What were you saying? You can't remember, can you?
No, I'm just saying I'm curious as to why, if the House and the Senate are now both Democrats, that's positive for markets, when I've always been told since I've been in markets that when you've got gridlock, it's fantastic for the US. And it's an interesting dichotomy, because I do agree that it's important that she actually is able to pass some legislation, because poor Obama has sat there for 8 years and did almost nothing. So yes and no. I'm not quite convinced. Fair enough, I've seen quite a lot of research this week to say if Trump actually wins, he's quite positive for quite a lot of sectors in the US. So, but bizarrely, they're both bullish for defence spending. So if you want to buy defence stocks, both of them will be in your back pocket. And from what I can see, Clinton appears to be more bullish in terms of defence than Trump does, because he doesn't want to spend any money on NATO, etc. She's going to destroy healthcare in the US from everything she said, because she wants to make sure that healthcare is free and affordable. Though at the same time she's doing Obamacare, where prices are about to go up by 20% across a number of states. So she speaks with forked tongue there. But there's a number of sectors where it's not a slam dunk that Trump will be terrible for markets. I think if he brings money back to America, at the moment, you've got this ridiculous situation where they can put their money in Ireland and not pay any taxes. Well, if he starts saying, let's make corporation tax drop and bring your money back, that could be bullish for America. So I think the short term, it'll just be like, oh dear, he's such a lunatic. What on earth are we going to do?
Yeah, the only
but I
problem
think
is,
he's got some really good political...
If you believe the media,
but the media hate
newspapers, then the only foreign ties he's got is with Russia. So if he's going to bring back money, it's got to be from Russia, because nobody else he hasn't really gone out and visited anybody else.
Oh no, come on, you're being facetious here. We're
talking
about companies like Apple that have most of their cash in Ireland, for instance.
But to
they can stop bringing their money back.
To get back to why I would prefer having Democrats or Republicans. I mean, it doesn't really matter which one. And I suppose one should go back and do the actual research maybe before we debate it, so we have the actual facts. But and measure the market when you have a hung council instead of having both Republicans and both. Maybe it's an interesting project to do, not mine. But in any case, for me, it's a case of, if you want to then spend more on defense, or you want to spend more on infrastructure, all of these needs to go through both councils. And if you have different thoughts and different objectives in the two councils, you're going to struggle. You can't reform tax to get companies to pay less tax, so you can't do that, because the one would do it, the other one won't do it. The one wants to do it in this way, the other one wants to do it in a different way. Infrastructure is the same problem. Fiscal stimulus, for example, like cash for clunkers we had. Look how long that cash for clunkers came through.
If you are right, and you've got the House and the Senate different to each other, why are the markets so terrified of Trump? Because listening to you, he's a lame duck. He can do nothing. So why are markets so scared? And I think the reality is there are certain things the president can enact. There are certain things he can pass through. So it's not entirely true that you have to have both Democrat House and both sides.
Do you think the market, sorry to interrupt you two, but
yes.
Do you think that the market is right this week? I mean, if you have a look at the Financial Times, for example, you see the following front page story: rising anxiety among global investors propelled, it says here, the swiftest weekly dash into cash since 2013 as money managers dumped bonds and drove the longest sell-off in the benchmark S&P 500 since the financial crisis. It's the longest thing, but I mean, it's still a tiny amount. It's 2.9%. Come on, that's not a dash into cash. That's a minor correction in low volume in a market that was overbought.
That's the problem with media, is that you need to write a headline. Well, we are media as well, I suppose, but you need to write a headline to get people to buy your newspaper or to like your article on the website. So obviously you're going to put words like that in to exaggerate the actual what's happening. But I do think there is uncertainty because of what myself and Joanne has just debated, because there's two different views already.
Yes.
Now you can think if there's 100 different views, there's lots of uncertainty in the market. So I think, and people has made a substantial sum of money since the low of 2009. So we've had a fair bull market. So you take some profit off the table and you reduce risk, basically. The problem is currently it's not only shares, it's bonds as well. So the bond market is also selling off. So the only alternative is cash at this stage, and that's
and
not
gold.
Cash and gold, yeah. That's not only an offshore phenomenon, that's also a local phenomenon over the last couple of months, as we've seen bonds selling off and we've seen shares not doing great. So, I mean, and investors, and we did a little article on that, and if you look at real returns over the last 3 years and you look at rolling 3-year periods, I mean, real returns are very, very low. So investors are struggling, and I think investors are panicking to a degree, and they're saying, well, if you can't get me, if you can't even beat inflation by taking equity risk, I'm just going to put my money in cash. So I think there's a lot of people sitting with cash.
But Arno, just on that point, when you're talking about cash, you're talking very much of South African perspective, because you cannot get real returns
Offshore, it's
offshore
not a, yeah,
cash.
it's not
So
a,
you're right. I think from South African fund
even in
managers'
South Africa,
perspective,
on real basis, you're not getting a real return. You're getting a slight real return, but after fees,
but
you're probably making a loss in inflation.
sure, but you're quite close, and the reality is you're not taking any risk for that. The risk is the upside potential you might not
Yep,
get if you're not in
yep,
the equity
yep.
markets. But offshore is a very different story. I mean, I think when we talk about bond markets offshore having fallen, I think that's a perfectly irrational thing to do, irrespective of who's going to win on next week, Tuesday. Bond markets were so overvalued, it was a joke. Even the ECB has come out and said lots of comments about maybe ZIRP's not working. There's one, Deutsche Bank this week said again, we can't run our banks in an environment of zero interest rates. So offshore it's slightly different. Locally, I agree. Locally is a different, when you sit in front of a client locally, it is hard to justify having equities and bonds when you can sit in cash and get decent yields. Our argument would be, however, in South Africa, and I'm sure you probably have the same, inflation's probably peaked here. The government, the central bank's probably going to start cutting rates at some point, and domestic equities offering you some decent returns.
49,700 on the all-share index as we speak at the moment. It's its lowest level for quite a long time. It's an international influence, though, Arno. I mean, Joanne's saying offering value, certainly offering more value today than it was yesterday because it's down
And I think
over
there's
1%
the
again.
point I want to make is and it ties into what Joanne just said. I mean, assets, doesn't matter which asset you look at, is expensive. And I mean, if this is this is just a reset for the next bull phase, I don't know. Maybe it's the start of a bear market. We never know that. But what I'm saying is, investors should be careful, and they should lower their expectations, because I think the good days are over. We need a readjustment in terms of, I mean, if you just look at the amount of money that's been pumped into assets, that's why assets are so expensive. They're expensive for a reason. So if we do see inflation coming out of the UK, for example, Europe's got some inflation, and even the US is having inflation. If that is happening, then one can see that some of that extra liquidity might be taken out of the market. So therefore, asset prices, in my opinion, might have further to go
Let's
down.
hope so, because there's a lot of money waiting on the sidelines, I think, for cheaper assets. Let's go to the UK now. You alluded to Brexit earlier on, Joanne. High Court rules this week that Article 50 cannot be invoked without a Commons vote. 3 old, middle-aged, pasty, bewigged judges went against the views of 17.4 million people because a money manager, a money manager.
A woman. That's an interesting comment. Okay.
Well, what do you want me to say? She's a woman. I'm saying she's a
Why
woman.
mention it?
She's a money manager.
Why mention it?
Why mention that the judges are 3 pasty-faced, middle-aged, bewigged old, you know what? She brought this case. She was the one that brought it, and they all said, yeah, because they were pro-Remain. So they've gone
And you
against
can
it.
also say she's married to one of the biggest financiers in the UK as
Thank
well.
you.
So you can add that in as well if you
Yes,
want
who's
to.
probably a donor to certain well-connected people.
So the next question should be, are they really acting on behalf of the people, or are they acting on behalf of the capitalist? And
Okay.
that's the big question. That's the big debate within the UK, and that's the debate that you read in the newspapers in the UK. The whole thing, that they act on behalf of the actual people in the UK, or that they do this for capitalists. And I tell you, I've told this story to a lot of people. I mean, I did a couple of walks in London, and once you mention to them that you're anywhere close to investments, or you do anything, even if you, I think, price a fund or do some admin, they hate you. They detest you. So this is not going to go down well, I think, with the general public, and that's the big problem. So how Parliament's going to vote on this, I don't know. I think they might be foolish if they vote
There's
against
480 MPs, I think, that are pro-Remain out of the 620 MPs
Yeah,
that there are.
most of them are pro-Remain, but I think a bit like your comment about the will of the people, I think what you're going to see, because remember it goes to appeal court now. So this is not over, it goes to appeal court in December. From what I've read, the appeal court's probably going to vote in favour of this first announcement, because the appeal court have a lot of respect for those old men you were talking about, because apparently they're quite respected judges. Irrespective, the feeling is this court hearing will stand. The feeling is that the Remain campers within Parliament will probably vote to leave as well, provided it's soft Brexit, not hard Brexit. So what you're seeing now, if you look at the currency strategists, they think sterling could go from 125 to 135, but probably sit around there. Remember, it was 150 when it fell. So they're not saying Brexit's off the table, but let's start having a proper negotiation about this. So she's against the free movement of people. That's utterly ridiculous if you want to be part of the single market. She can't have both. Perhaps what she needs to start doing is to have an Australian system where it's a point system. So allow people to come in, because they still want doctors coming to the UK. They still want nurses. There's lots of ways they can play this. We don't have to have a hard Brexit. It doesn't have to be all fall down. And you can still make the person at the fish and chip shop down the road feel happy about their life. But you can't... the fact is, what was the comment from Michael Gove? The individuals don't believe experts anymore. And that is what Brexit was all about. It was people in ivory towers, we don't trust them. But funny enough, when the inflation basket starts going sky high, and those inflation numbers you're talking about are a lot before Brexit actually came about, they're only going to get worse. Let's talk about Apple this week. Apple's increasing their products by 20% for iPhones in the UK. You're going to have a situation where inflation in the UK is going to start rising. That man
There's
in the street...
There's a think tank actually says it's going to go up 4 times. I think you just mentioned
I don't know,
it, yeah.
but maybe you're right. I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to start seeing high inflation. And that person who's the lower echelons, who hates status quo, who hates the ivory tower people, is going to hate it when their wages aren't going up and their lifestyle's changing.
That is very true, yeah. No,
Anything happening in South Africa this week? I mean, apart from the politics, Whitey Basson stepping down. Does that mean that Steinhoff and Shoprite are going to get it together?
There's still the rumours out in the market, and after he retired, or after he made the announcement, after the AGM where he made the announcement, there was a run on Steinhoff price somewhat up in anticipation of this deal that might go through or might not go through. I think it's much too early to say whether it would go through or not. It's definitely possible for them to do it. It's not impossible. I would still say that. And I think if there is, and I still say this and I stand to this, if there is people that can do that deal, it's those oaks. Who's in Steinhoff, who's in Shoprite, who's in... I mean, those are the perfect...
And the other one.
Isn't there something on terms of, and I don't understand it, but Christo Wiese's percentage of the group or something that changes next year, March or something. So if he doesn't do this deal now, his percentage... There's according to some research I read this week, that Christo Wiese has to get this deal to go through now, well, he still can. Otherwise, next year his percentages drop and then he can't make the deal happen. And on top of that, because so many Steinhoff shareholders are also ShopRite shareholders, the feeling is there won't be a massive premium on ShopRite, because it's not in any of their interests. Because if you're a Steinhoff shareholder and a ShopRite, you don't want to overpay for ShopRite. I don't know, but from what I gather, it's a lot to do with what Christo Wiese's percentage holding is and when that might change in terms of voting bloc. So I think this deal goes through quite soon. That's
just out of interest on Whitey Basson.
Oh, by the way, I was offered an interview with him today, and they said,
you choose us.
You've got 5 minutes. I said, I beg your pardon. 5 hours, for goodness sake. So I politely said, no, I'll wait until the new year when he's less busy and get an in-depth half an hour. But, I mean, come on, 5 minutes now. Yeah. I've always gone on very well with him. Your point?
Yeah, so and I presume it's a lot of capitalists listening to the show, so the right place to say something like this.
Go on, then.
And there was a lot of problems. People had issues with his paycheck. And I think that
100 million.
That probably contributed to retirement. If you ask me, I think he's just fed up with people telling him how much he can earn and can't earn.
Well, that's why he wanted to take it private. Remember all those years ago, he wanted to take ShopRite off the exchange.
So, and I think Whitey Basson, being a very... I mean, he likes to do things the way he wants to do it, and he doesn't want people to point fingers at him, which is, I think, probably valid. Just out of interest, if you look when he started with ShopRite, I think that the market cap for ShopRite was something like 1 mil when he started. And look at the market cap now.
He bought it from OK or something, was it? The other way around. Well, he bought OK from SAB, that's what he did.
They bought
for a rand.
For a rand, sorry, that's a different story.
All the debt deducted, that whole story. Now, if you look at the market cap now, and then you ask yourself, geez, that growth, that capital growth that he's created, not by himself, but he was the master manipulator and the manager of everything. And you ask yourself, is 100 and whatever that number was, 121 million, or what was the number that he was paid? Is that really that big in comparison to the amount of capital he's actually created since he started?
And the number
of
jobs that he creates every single year. I think one should be fair when you make those comments and you say, yeah, but he can't earn that, he can't earn. If you were invested in ShopRite, then you've made the same amount of money with him, he's made it for you. So, again, I say there's probably the right platform to make this type of comment, because it's mostly capitalist
who probably listen.
We've got
to,
a few
to the
lefties
show.
out there as well.
But yeah, so if you want to then badmouth him for 121 mil, whatever that amount was, then you also got to take into consideration the amount of capital he created over the time.
Joanne, markets quickly. Obviously, you were saying to me before we went on there, 8 days down in a row for the S&P. Markets oversold. Will the trigger be the jobs data this afternoon for a relief rally? And if it is a relief rally, is it just that, and then it continues going down, or have we started something? Have we broken down technically? Do you think S&P?
Well, the S&P has broken down technically. 2120 is quite a key technical level. That broke this week. All I know is if I was a money manager in the US, I wouldn't want to be long going into Tuesday's elections. Yes, there's a lot of cash on the sidelines, and I'm not sure it's a slam dunk, even if Clinton wins, that markets will be happy. Just from a mathematical perspective, right now the odds are if Trump wins, the markets will fall 13%, between 10 and 13 is what I've seen. And if she wins, the markets will rally between 2 to 3%. I know when I look at those odds, I don't like them very much. And so therefore, what we've done in our funds, we've kept bit of powder dry, a bit of cash, and if we're wrong, we'll buy back in again. But I just think that the chance of being wrong and losing a lot of money are quite high at the moment. Look, I hope he doesn't win. I really hope the market is rational and they vote next week and say, no, we want Clinton. But people aren't always rational when they're in the voting booth, and I think this percentage of undecideds is very high. So back to your question, there's also other things that are happening. Oil prices have been breaking down. Let's not forget that.
True.
Bond markets look quite weak at the moment.
Yep.
Inflation is picking up globally. A comment we didn't talk about earlier was the biggest inflows have gone into inflation-linked bonds ever the last week. So people are starting to pick up that inflation is becoming a bit of a problem. And then on top of that, we've got the Italian elections on the 4th of December. Not an election, as some people think, for an out-of-Europe story. But if he loses the election, he might resign, and then he might call on an election to leave Europe.
Arno,
So
also vulnerable
lots of
to the
risk.
downside, markets?
No, I definitely think so. I mean, you've heard my view on. I think liquidity might be taken out of the market at some stage. We all knew that. We just didn't know when it would happen, and it seems as though we might be closer to what was anticipated. Inflation picking up in Europe, inflation in the UK peaking up, in the US even we've got inflation. So, and the problem with the inflation numbers is not so much the inflation. Inflation is a good thing. You don't want deflation. Inflation is a good thing. It's
I
not
want
a bad
deflation.
thing.
I want things
As
that I
long as
buy
it's
this year
not-
to be less next year. Thank you very much.
As long as you don't lose your job.
As long as it's not hyperinflation, and that's the big concern. I think if we do see genuine inflation coming through, and remember that's still to be proven, but if it is genuine inflation, remember inflation is like a vicious circle. Once it's going up, people start participating, and it gets worse and worse. But then Feds or reserve banks are definitely behind the curve. So you're going to see big moves from reserve banks to tame inflation. They would have to act quite viciously and quite quickly to actually tame inflation.
So more
Otherwise,
downside,
inflation
just
might be out
wrapping
of
this up
hand.
now, more downside, yeah?
Yeah, so I think more downside, definitely.
Okay. Arno, thanks very much for your time. Joanne, the same. Joanne Baynham is from Might on Optimal. Arno Smit is from Sky Blue Fund Managers. That's it for the weekly wrap. Back same time next week.